morning.
Special good morning to our visitors. Glad to have you guys back. I really enjoyed Aiden's class on peacemaking this morning, and I hope we can see more people in that class. I think it's going to be very important for us to learn about, and I also really like the stories and the examples that Aiden pulled out from the Bible, especially when we were looking at Goliath and understanding how Goliath was somebody that was just a tool to distract and a tool to get Israel in this cycle of fear that they were never going to climb out of themselves. They had done a really good job of that, and how Goliath was the issue that was causing people to question and forget to rely on God. I think that was really important for us to understand, and maybe I've missed that part of the story of David and Goliath's role there. Like, if you can imagine just somebody that is calling out insults to your God or just constantly insulting you day in and day out, and you can't do anything about it, or you're too afraid to do something about it, and it's just constantly there ringing in your ears. Well, that'd be pretty discouraging, right? And I mean, I have no doubt Goliath was big and scary, and he was obviously the problem that needed to be taken care of. And I'm glad that David stepped up to do that. Um, and I'm thinking about that, and I'm also just thinking about how many other things are the Goliaths in our life that are calling out for our attention and our focus, and maybe sometimes we don't even realize how big of a Goliath it is that's taking all of our attention. And it's taking all of our time. You know, everything is essentially fighting for your time and your attention. There's a lot of things that we place an emphasis of value on, and maybe we don't even realize how much value that takes on our time. Or we don't even realize just how important it is to us until it's taken away. And in a lot of different generations, right, you've seen how different generations have been changed by something big, something notable that happened in a generation, whether it was a war or a depression that changed society after that. If you move into like the 70s and the 80s, you get kind of the start of the tech, and look how far we've progressed with technology being such an emphasis on our society. And how much time technology takes out of our lives and how much of our attention is given over to devices in our hand or applications or something like that. You know, these are constantly calling out to us and saying, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me, use me, use me, use me, use me, right? And maybe we want to give a little bit of thought about how we place a lot of value, we place a lot of time, we give a lot of attention to things that don't necessarily give us the value that we would find in giving our time and attention to God and to Jesus Christ. This morning, this is not the sermon that's anti-cell phone, anti-technology, or anything like that. It's nothing like that, but I think we would do well, especially as Christians, as we are naturally analytical people that understand actions and consequences and attitudes from the Scripture have an effect on our lives. I think, especially as Christians, we should really be looking at where is our attention? What do we place the most value on with our time? And is that giving us anxiety, or is that giving us the contentment that we can find in Jesus Christ? You know, as I was saying earlier, everything's fighting for our attention, and companies have done a really good job of making sure that our eyes are constantly on a screen, right? And they know they're constantly battling and in competition with anything else that could have our attention. And so there's been a lot of science behind getting people to stay on their screens and stay on their phones long enough. Let's look at this. In The Anxious Generation, How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness by Jonathan Haidt, he does a lot of research about how our minds have been trained to focus and to constantly scroll. And we like it, right? We're always scrolling through something, and suddenly hours have gone by and we've consumed a lot of information that we don't necessarily know what to do with it. And in this book, he presents a lot of facts, and based on a lot of research, I know that's a little bit small, but in his book, he grabs a screenshot from a presentation that was put out by Facebook that's teaching people, okay, this is the cycle that we've developed to get, especially teenagers, staying on Facebook and on their phone. At first, we present them with the idea that they're after your emotions. Hey, we got something that you would like. And then they present them with something novel. Well, look at this post and look at this recording. And then that gives them the reward of enjoyment or maybe a like or something like that. And then the cycle starts all over. Oh, you liked that? Well, here's something else novel. And here's the reward for investing your time in that. Oh, you liked that? And the cycle goes on. So there's a science behind keeping people continually in the cycle of having their attention on something that seems to give them a reward. Another way that they've developed this is kind of like this. It starts with a trigger here that you see in the upper left-hand corner. Maybe it's like a push on the phone or something like that, a swipe or something like that, and that leads to the action of needing more and revealing more. And then you get sort of a reward and a kick from that, a dopamine kick, or you get a like or a share or something, and then you've spent and you've invested your time in this, and now that you've invested your time in it, guess what? The trigger can start all over. Well, you like this also. And all of this to say that there's been an entire science to capturing and keeping people's attention. And there's also a science behind a vertical scroll, how people like it, and this is how casino wheels were made to move vertically, because for some reason the psychology of the vertical movement keeps people attached, and there's all these orders and activities that keep people focused and their time and attention on one thing. And what's interesting is that time and attention that's spent on these things don't actually lead to a satisfying reward. It's crazy, right? You would think it would if we're going to invest so much time and attention in something. Before this passage here, I've got Matthew chapter 6, 19 through 24, and this is a great passage. Jesus is talking about, don't lay up your treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay your treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, your heart will be also. And talks about how the eye is the lamp of the body and what you consume goes inside of you. This comes before our scripture reading this morning, where Jesus has also been talking about people finding the kingdom to be what's going to provide for them. And Jesus is speaking in a time where the great anxiety of people's lives is, where am I going to get my next meal? Are these clothes going to last me? Am I going to survive through this time? And so Jesus is speaking to people's regular anxieties of if they were going to catch the fish or they weren't going to eat. And that was appropriate for that time. And what Jesus eventually wraps it up and say is that, you know what, God has been watching over you for a long, long time. And look, humanity is still here because he's continued to take care of your basic necessities. But then just before that, Jesus is talking about where you are investing your treasure and your heart. That's all you. And so you get to choose. Am I gonna invest it in the kingdom with a God that provides everything that I need and says, don't worry about it. I will provide for you what you need to be satisfied? Or am I going to invest it elsewhere? And Jesus using the example of money or material. People will chase those things and that's where their heart will be, but unfortunately those things will pass away. And so we could trade out the idea of money and material as we've been taught for so long that, you know, these things really don't satisfy, necessary in some spaces. But God has always provided for us and will provide for us just enough. We could replace these with, okay, well, what else could the money and the material be that my heart and my mind are just so invested in? What things capture my attention for the majority of my day? Really just the majority of where I want to spend my time. And is that actually giving me value, or is it taking away my value? Do I feel valuable after all of these things? Maybe we could just think about our day in general. It's what I do in my day when I think about everything that I do. Is my heart invested in those things like my life relies on it? Or do I understand that there's things that are necessary and responsible, but my heart and my mind is just constantly thinking about, when is my next moment in prayer? When's my next moment in devotion? When is the next moment going to be with a God that said, I'll take care of you and everything that you need. I've promised it, and I'll keep it. I've actually provided even more for that. Scrolling is not rewarding. Like I said, I'm not anti-technology or phone. We got a website. We're trying to do more with that, whatever. We're on Zoom right now. But is our regular focus on just trying to feed our brain and our eyes with entertainment? Or is our regular focus actually on being loyal to Jesus Christ and thinking about the faith that we have and not just pursuing a feeling for the moment? More on that a little bit later. Continuing this book here on this really tiny chart also, this chart just pretty much explains that people in 1990 had a sense of feeling that life was meaningless, but once you get over here to about 2010, when there were more devices in hands and screen time being used, you see that sudden uptick in both boys and girls that life really is meaningless. And this is the vicious cycle of spending time on devices and social media don't actually produce ideas that, wow, I can actually be going somewhere, I can do something with this. It's actually the opposite, where people are like, is there more to life than just feeding my eyes? Or is there more to life than just wanting to see the things that I'm used to seeing and then having to stay in that cycle? And so it's obvious that people are making the realization and are willing to testify, to be put on a statistic, that something is missing from their life. When you have access to everything, still something is missing from their life. And maybe there needs to be a challenge in there to say, okay, well, maybe I actually know what you're missing. And it's not what you're missing, it's actually who you're missing out on. In John chapter 9, there's this whole chapter where Jesus has healed a man from his blindness. And everybody knew that he was blind, and it creates this rift in society. And Jesus wasn't afraid of being controversial in society. Jesus was not afraid of being the person that people wanted to ask, are you real or are you not? And as Jesus has healed a blind man, and those that rule the synagogue knew that he was once blind and are asking him, who healed you? The blind man simply says, well, I'm not sure I know what he looks like, but I know that his name is Jesus. And they bring in his parents, and they're asking, is this your son? They're like, yeah, that's our son. Okay, well, how is he able to see? And they're saying, why don't you ask him? He's an adult. He can tell you. But what is specifically pointed out here in John 9:22 is his parents said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone should confess Jesus to be Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. And so these parents kind of separate themselves. We'll just ask our son, because they want to maintain their status within their synagogue. And so they're not quite ready to really commit their entire beings to this Jesus Christ that can work a miracle. And that's too bad. This isn't the only time somebody was afraid to get out of the synagogue. Actually, a lot of people were under the threat of having to leave. John chapter 12, verse 42 to 43 says, nevertheless, many, even of the authorities, believed in him, that's Jesus, but for fear of the Pharisees, they did not confess it, so that they would not be put out of the synagogue, for they love the glory that comes from man more than the glory that comes from God. And so we saw a very specific spot where two parents were afraid to be put out of the synagogue. And now we get to move into a broader category where there's authorities that believe in Jesus but want to maintain their seat in the synagogue. And so if you were a Jew but you loved Jesus, you were making a really difficult choice here of like, am I gonna keep my social standing, or am I gonna commit all the way and have to give this other part of my life away? And there at the end of John's gospel, Jesus says it plainly to his disciples as they've really dedicated themselves to him. John 16, verse 1, I have said all these things to keep you from falling away. They will put you out of the synagogues. It's going to happen. Indeed, the hour is coming when whoever kills you will think he is offering service to God, and they will do these things because they have not known the Father nor me. But I have said these things to you, that when their hour comes, you may remember that I told them to you. So if you were a Jew and you wanted to believe in Jesus, you were making a really difficult choice here, right? Grown up in the synagogue, this is what I know, this is where my family went, but I've seen Jesus work miracles, and I've heard his words of life. And so, as a Jew, you were making that tough choice there. That was a difficult choice. I bet you were anxious over that. And it wasn't Jews. It was also the Gentiles that were having to make the same difficult choice. Paul would write in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 20, "No, I imply that what pagans sacrifice they offer to demons and not to God." I don't want you to be participants with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the table of the Lord and the table of demons. Shall we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than he? And so if you were a Jew, you were making the difficult choice. If you were a Gentile, you were making the difficult choice. I can't serve both in the temple of pagans and idols and serve God. I have to let one go because it has to be all about Jesus. And it deserves to be all about Jesus. He deserves it. So two areas of life. You're making the difficult choice. In Acts chapter 12, verse 1 through 5, you get the result of the apostles that have made the choice to completely follow Jesus and be put out of the synagogue. Acts chapter 12, verse 1, "And about that time, Herod the king, the Jewish king, laid violent hands on some who belonged to the church, and he killed James, the brother of John, with a sword. And when he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter also." I mean, exactly what Jesus said there at the end of John came true in the book of Acts. They thought they were doing a service to God. Can you imagine being John and your own brother, James, who you grew up with, that you went fishing with a family business, that you spent time at the feet of Jesus with? You went with James and you went with Peter to the top of the Mount of Transfiguration to see Jesus peel back his glory for just a moment. You went into the room where Jesus raised somebody from the dead. You were the ones that you spent time with Jesus more so than all the other apostles. Can you imagine being one of those three, especially being John, and your own brother, James, is killed? And then the other important witness to you is put in prison. What do you think that did for the morale of John in this persecution? What do you think that did for the morale of the church in this time? It's probably devastating. But these men had agreed. Everything that we have experienced about Jesus is worth telling people, and it's worth being put to death by the sword or going to prison. It's worth it. And if we turned back now, then all of this will be for nothing. They were willing to devote every part of their life, even if it meant that death was imminent. At any moment, the authority could come after you. How much does that say the value of Jesus had in their life? It was every part of their life. And they were willing to die for that part of their life. But at the same time, people that are so wrapped up in Jesus more than anything are also the same people that are finding complete contentment with this Jesus and just food and clothes. That's all that they needed. 1 Timothy 6 through 8. "But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content." It's incredible that the most simple lifestyle, the one that Jesus said, "I'll take care of you," is the one that is the most satisfying and worth dying for. It almost seems like it's the most valuable life. But when we start craving something else, something to coddle our emotions, something to distract us for a long period of time, what we saw in all these charts beforehand is that, man, these don't satisfy. In fact, they make me feel worse. So which of these two should we be giving the majority of our value of our time with? In another book, Dopamine Nation, Dr. Anna Lembicki studies and works at Stanford up here. And what she noticed is that it's not just regular narcotic addiction or alcohol addiction that makes people feel like unless they are using this drug, they're unhappy. So this goes through almost every part of our life when we're trying to pursue a dopamine fix on anything else. Unless we're pursuing that or engaged with that, we're unhappy. And so our own pursuits to try to find comfort in something to fill our time makes us unhappy. And then here's this Jesus, this God that says, you seek me first, and I'll make you realize I'm all that you need, and I provided everything that you need, more than the day-to-day, but something that gives you hope of pursuing something beyond just your regular life. Turning down our desire to be constantly comfortable allows us to grow in wisdom and knowledge and faith and stand firm in difficulty. So if we're not practicing walking with Jesus, and if we're not practicing having to overcome difficult things, even to the degree of the persecution that the apostles had to go through, how are we going to be built up in our faith when we're just trying to coast along and doing something else? If we're filling our time and our minds with activity that's not going to grow or strengthen our faith, then we can't expect to stand in the day or in the times of trouble. But when all of our value is on Jesus regularly in our days, we'll be able to stand firm with wisdom and knowledge and faith in any challenge that might come our way. You know, part of understanding Jesus is really understanding the difference between faith and feelings. Sometimes we're pursuing more feelings in every part of our life, but maybe even in parts of our faith, we're chasing a feeling too. We're feeling, oh, I want to have that feeling of that song. I want to have that feeling of being elevated. I want to have that feeling of something. And then when we're missing out on that feeling, it's like, is there a problem with the actual faith? Or if the feeling goes away, then the faith may not have been there to begin with. But when we are pursuing faith and belief and the principles of this, the feelings will come and difficulty will come, but the faith will be stronger. In John chapter 6, 68 to 69, Jesus has just fed the 5,000, and people have come looking for Jesus for more food, essentially. And Jesus calls them out on that and says, I am the bread of life, though, and you must partake in me, or you'll have no life. And the people that are all around him are saying, oh, this is too hard. They were there to be satisfied in stomach and feel good about what Jesus can give for them. But when Jesus starts giving them the lesson on having faith in all of him, then they all wanted to turn away and follow him no more, as it says in John 6:66. But when Jesus turns to his disciples and asks them, well, do you want to go away too? It's Peter that speaks up and says, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life, and we have believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God. And that believing and that coming to knowing, as I've preached before, is the actual learning about who Jesus is. It wasn't Jesus, you make us feel good. It was Jesus, we've witnessed you raise the dead. We've witnessed you cast out demons. We've witnessed you perform miracles. We've witnessed you calm the storm on the sea. And who could do anything like this? Jesus, we've witnessed your teaching and how they are life-changing and given us everything that we have needed to know. Jesus, we have witnessed your teaching for us of how to be disciples and how to go out and what to say. Jesus, we have heard your words, and through all of these things, we realize that you are the one that God said that he was going to send. Now that's a faith that's built on facts and experience and devotion. It's a little bit more than just feeling that Jesus might be something great. Listen to how John writes it in his letter. 1 John chapter 1. That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we looked upon and have touched with our hands concerning the word of life. The life was made manifest, and we have seen it, And we testify to it and proclaim to you the eternal life which was with the Father and was made manifest to us. That which we have seen and heard, we proclaim also to you, so that you too may have fellowship with us. And indeed, our fellowship is with the Father and his Son, Jesus Christ. And we are writing these things so that our joy may be complete. It's kind of covering all the bases there, right? We saw Jesus. We heard Jesus. We touched Jesus. And we want to tell you about Jesus. And we are telling you all of these things of everything that we witnessed and experienced so that you can share in the same joy that we have. The faith comes first. The feelings will follow, especially because the faith is strong. I've heard it happen where some are saying, well, you know what, this church or this area, this group doesn't work out for me because I just don't feel like the Spirit's moving, or I don't feel like I'm excited about the worship or something like that. And that's unfortunate when people are trying to pursue the feeling of something, especially when the Bible consistently testifies that the Spirit provides wisdom, knowledge, and ability. So when we have those things, and we're really understanding the facts of the faith and the importance of the contentment that we can have, not just contentment, but according to John, complete joy in placing all of our value and our time and our energy into wanting to be with this God, rather than looking for a feeling of satisfaction elsewhere. One more quote from this book. It's really important. Maybe the most notable chapter in here is chapter 8 of this book. Jonathan, great author, social psychologist, atheist, doesn't believe, but in chapter 8, he makes the full explanation. He says, I'm an atheist, always have been, but there's one thing that I'm finding that is just so important about Christianity, really about going to church in general, and that is the community that people have, and it's detrimental to be together, because without that, we are seeing what happens when people spend all of their time alone, unhappy, miserable, higher mental illnesses, unable to communicate and problem solve. And so he says it's actually really important that people learn spiritual practices and go to church. Here's what he says. Looking at these 6 practices, he kind of lists 6 things before, can help us see that many of us have lost as we have entwined our lives more fully with our digital assistants. These practices point us to ways to improve our own lives and those of children and adolescents too. These practices that all of us can do, whether we are religious or not, to flourish and connect in our age of anxiety and fragmentation. In fact, they may be more important for those who are not religious and don't get exposure to these practices inside of a faith community. A man that is a social psychologist and atheist is pointing out, man, people really need to go to church and be involved. And in fact, maybe this is more important for people that have never been involved in a faith community, because they need these things. They need to be connected, and they need to understand that there's something bigger than themselves, bigger than what's just capturing their attention for the majority of their day. And I hope that we can examine our lives. We can examine our hearts. We can examine everything about us and saying, okay, what is the most valuable thing in my life? And have I made Jesus that valuable person in my life? Because where my time and my attention goes will reveal if he is the most valuable thing in my life or if something else is taking that spot. And only one of these is going to satisfy, and they can't share the space. Maybe we need to do some self-examination of our hearts and our relationship with God and determine, am I regularly looking forward to spending time with a God that not only said, I deserve to be the value of your life, but also said, I gave my life so that I could be the center of yours and provide for you everything that you need. And to help you understand, there are things that want to take away my value in your life. It might seem silly to think that we place more value on something else than the cross. And it seems kind of silly even to just be talking about how digital devices have made an impact on our life and then kind of take away from our faith. I feel really silly talking about it. But the reality is that there will never be a time when something is not competing with Jesus Christ. And that thing might change, whether it's a Goliath in person, or whether it's a movement, or whether it's something so small that can be held in our hand. Something will always be fighting for the spot where Jesus Christ belongs. Think about your time this week now. Where is most of your time going to go? Granted, we have regular responsibilities. Where you place the most value in your day-to-day will determine what really has the most value in your life. And I hope that you would prioritize, if it's not there already, the value of devoted prayer and scripture, time with Jesus. And that he gains all of your attention and your mind throughout your life. In Proverbs chapter 27, verse 19, this is what this verse says. As in water, face reflects face, so the heart of man reflects the man. What are we filling our hearts with? Because it's going to come out on the outside. What's in our heart, what's in our minds, is the way that we will present ourselves. Fill your heart with the Jesus that can satisfy.